Welcome, welcome, Dan.
I'm excited to be here. It's been a while.
I'm thrilled to have you. It's Groundhog Day, right? It's
Mm.
the summer of Groundhog Day. New tariffs, war is over.
Yeah.
Netanyahu in
Mm.
the Oval Office. Discuss.
Sometimes I try to put myself in the position of someone who is running a Republican campaign this cycle, running a Republican super PAC at the NRCC or the NRSC, and they just must wake up every day and just want to bang their head against a desk because Trump seems so committed to making their lives harder.
Yeah.
Right? Affordability is number one issue. So what does he do? He launches more tariffs, something that voters despise, absolutely
Yeah.
despise, launches more of them. He can't end this war he started that has raised gas prices. He
Mhm.
then has Netanyahu to the White House, which is another problem for him, particularly with his base. And
Right.
it's just like at every turn, he is doing what Trump wants to do, not what's good for Republicans.
We talk a lot about the Democratic split over Israel, and that is very much like a mainstream media talking point. But there's a real MAGA split over Israel, too, which is in some ways more profound.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly at the very top among some of the most powerful media personalities, some of the most pro-MAGA folks, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, and they're in a constant war with the Ben Shapiros of the world. Obviously, we have our own splits there. But the other thing is that the young MAGA voters are almost as skeptical as Israel as the young Democratic voters. And that is that the change in public opinion on Israel and particularly U.S. aid to Israel is generational, not just ideological. And I think that gets lost in this debate a lot. And that's going to affect Republicans. Those are the voters they need, the ones who turned out in 2024 to turn out in 2026, if they have any chance of minimizing their losses here.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important point about Israel because, I'm Jewish. My husband's Jewish. My husband's a bit older than I am. And I think the closer you are to the Holocaust, to living through it, the more you I'm under 50, quite a bit. Let me just lie here.
Yes.
And he's over 60. And so there is a real split there. And with the younger generation, I don't think they understand the Holocaust and the history of Israel.
And if you are of a certain age, you have only known the Netanyahu government. You've never known a time when there was a realistic or even plausible path to a two-state solution.
Right.
You've only known a right-wing Israeli leader who has associated himself very explicitly with Republicans, whether it was going to Congress to attack Barack Obama, getting involved in these elections, being supportive of Trump, all of those things. And that has colored views here. And it is like they're like wherever you come down on the U.S. relationship with Israel, people have to recognize that it's not just a right-wing and left-wing split. The biggest movement in change, both on the question of aid to Israel, U.S. military aid with or without conditions, and on who you sympathize more with, the Palestinians or Israelis, which is this question Gallup has been asking for decades, is among independents. Like that is where the big shift has been. That's what Democrats have moved, Republicans have moved, but independents have also moved at basically the same rate as Democrats. And that has changed the politics here in a lot of ways that we're seeing play out in Michigan and some places like that.
I want to talk to you about Michigan, but I also just want to talk to you for a minute about the split, because it does strike me that first I want to ask you, you were working in the Obama White House when Netanyahu came and took a stand against Obama. Can you, I just remember that being so shocking.
Yeah, I mean, it was part of Obama and Netanyahu never got along. They had very, very big disagreements that really, reached their crest with the Iran deal in 2014, 2015. But it started from the beginning. And, it was relatively well known that some of Netanyahu's top aides were working very closely with Mitt Romney in the 2012 election. Here you have a country that is an ally, but the leader of the country is a political adversary of the president. And that's a very complicated dynamic to manage.
Wild. So younger voters, though, it strikes me that there is this real shift that's happening, which is it's not left versus right, but up versus down.
Yeah.
And we've heard Dan Osborne talk about this. We heard Troy Jackson talk about this in Maine. We've heard other, it's more of a Bernie-ish, that it's really about it's economic populism and not ideological. It's ideological, but in a way that's more about affordability.
Yeah, I think you nailed it exactly right, which is a lot of the conversation within political circles, whether you're on cable news or on podcasts like ours, or especially on Twitter or even Blue Sky, is left versus right. And that there are these candidates, there are more left wing and more to the center. And there is certainly an element of that. And certainly the candidates who won in New York were certainly far more liberal on issues other than just the economy than your standard median Democratic member of Congress. But there is this shift in politics where it really is up versus down. And there's this populism. And people think at a, 2/3 of voters think the economic system in this country is rigged.
Yeah.
Declining numbers of voters think that if you work hard, you can get by. And and capitalism is decreasing in favorability and socialism is increasing in favorability. And all of these things have created an environment where candidates who can speak with authenticity and passion about how the system is rigged can offer solutions on how to unrig it, both in terms of government corruption, but also just a very basic idea around everyone getting healthcare, better wages, those sorts of things, and can name the villains, the same villains that the people have. You're willing to actually call out the corporations, the special interests, the billionaires. You're speaking. You may or may not win your primary, but you have the political wind at your back in this environment. And too many Democrats, particularly establishment Democrats, have struggled to do that because it's not natural for a certain wing of the party that has been around for a while now.
Yeah. So say more about that, because that comes into, I think, the Michigan primary last night. We have a candidate, Haley Stevens, who was the establishment candidate. She has pretty much the establishment. I think almost everyone in the establishment.
Except Slotkin. Alyssa Slotkin is the only one who hasn't endorsed. Yeah.
But you had Gretchen, I don't know if Dana Nessel. I think a lot.
So she did. Gretchen, Dana Nessel, Gary Peters, and Debbie Stabenow have all endorsed Haley Stevens.
And a lot of corporations, a lot of big PACs. And then you have Dr. Saeed, who got Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. And so it's really like, a real ideological battle here. What did you think about last night?
This is a fascinating race. And it's partly a fascinating race because there has been no high quality polling of this race. No one has any idea who's actually winning. There was this one poll from a pollster of a sort of spotty reputation that does only live phone calls, doesn't do a lot of waiting, that showed Haley Stevens up, I think by 7 or 8 points on Abdul Saeed after Mallory McMorrow, the third candidate, dropped out. But no one really has any idea what is happening in this race. It's sort of like all of the battles within the party have manifested themselves in this race. So you have El Said will vote against Chuck Schumer, is anti-establishment. Haley Stevens is the handpicked candidate of Schumer and the DSCC. The biggest issue is probably between them is Israel. AIPAC is going to end up spending $60 million in this primary alone on Haley Stevens. And none of it actually about Israel, but because she is a candidate they want. Abdul has been a very aggressive critic of Israel, has called it a genocide, wants to end all aid to Israel, has called Israel an apartheid state. So this is a big dividing line there. I watched the debate last night. All of that was there. We're sort of in the final stretch here. We're watching the debate. It's hard to tell who thinks they're winning and who thinks they're losing. But it seems like they both think the race is close enough that they're trying to score a few points here and there and not take wild swings. The other part of this race that really is that you have all these super PACs and a lot of corporations supporting Haley Stevens. That is a bit. Abdul does not take corporate PAC money, although he does have super PACs, but they're labor super PACs supporting him. And so the influence of corporations, corporate money is a big part of this race too. And then over top of it is this unanswerable question about electability. It is the very strong belief of a lot of the establishment that Haley Stevens is much more electable than Abdul. And that if the people of Michigan were to nominate Abdul, then we would make it less likely, not impossible, but less likely that Democrats would win Michigan. And if we don't win Michigan, we're not. It's hard to get to a Senate majority without Michigan. Whether that are right or not is a question you can debate, but it's like a truly fascinating race. I think we're going to get a poll maybe as soon as today in this race. They'll maybe tell us a little bit more, but it's everything that everyone's been fighting about in the party on Twitter since 2024 is happening in Michigan.
For a long time, I thought she was such a bad speaker that it would be his to get.
Yeah.
But she seems like she's gotten a little better.
She has. She absolutely has. I think she is has come into her own as a candidate in the final stretch here. She does very, up until the recent part here, she did very few events, basically like very few town halls. Abdul is everywhere all the time on social media, in events. I think he said last night they've done 400 some events across Michigan, town halls where he's taking questions. She's had a much more cautious strategy of engagement with the voters and the media, but she's definitely there was that clip that went viral of her that a lot of people on the left really made fun of, about her, like a very aggressive Michigan accent, talking about giving some stick it to him or whatever it was.
Right.
And she's she leaned into that in, I think, a way that was effective.
Yeah.
The question here really is, in Michigan, you have 1 in 5 in typical Michigan primary, 1 in 5 Democratic primary voters is Black, and well over half are going to be women. And so the strategy from the pro Haley Stevens side is to win on women and Black voters. They've done this through 2 ways. One is they've run the AIPAC Super PAC has run a lot of ads calling Abdul a misogynist, saying he's toxic women, sort of trying to play a little bit on this to
Graham
swim
Plattner,
in the wake of Graham Plattner.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is Black voters. They have run there. If you can't turn on TV in Michigan without seeing a clip of Barack Obama in 2018 campaigning for Haley Stevens, complimenting her for having worked the work she had done on the auto task force when she worked in the Obama administration. And that has been that clip is not dated in any of these. So a lot of, anecdotally hear a lot of voters saying they think Obama has endorsed her.
Which he hasn't.
He has not endorsed any candidate in this race. And so how effective that'll be, what the turnout will look like in Wayne County is all going to determine what's happened here. But it's fascinating. And honestly, this election can't come soon enough because I'd like this fight to end in one way, shape, or form.
What percentage of voters in Michigan are Muslim?
I should know that off the top of my head, but it is the highest percentage of any state in the country. Early voting is not always a great predictor. Michigan had early vote by mail, and then they had started in person a couple of days ago in Dearborn County, which is where the sort of the nexus of that population is. Turnout has been quite high. Now, sometimes when there's a lot of enthusiasm, you cannibalize your election day vote with your early vote. So it's hard to say, but this is what makes this race so fascinating, because it is this big giant debate over Israel with a candidate being largely bankrolled by an AIPAC Super PAC with as the handpicked candidate of the Senate leadership in the state with the largest Muslim population that was the birthplace of the uncommitted movement against Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris.
Right. I mean, this is rough. And the big question, I think, in my mind, what I care about is, will whoever wins be able to get the voters of the other person?
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting question. This goes to electability. The electability argument is Haley Stevens flipped a Republican district. That is absolutely true in 2018. Since then, she's basically performed, particularly in 2024, as a generic Democrat. Good, fine. This is a 50-50 state that should be 3 to 4 to 5 points more Democratic if the national environment stays the way it is. And that she would functions essentially a generic Democrat who seems very Michigan in a state where the majority of the electorate in the general election are women. And that's a good argument that Abdul has these weaknesses because he is endorsed by Bernie, endorsed by AOC, is seen as the lefty candidate. There are some comments about defunding the police from 2020 that he has walked back, but that exists, and he has more vulnerabilities. Now, the counter argument, I think, is he's very, very talented. She's talented too, but just in a different way. But he is very deft as a communicator, and that can help you navigate some of these things.
Yeah, he's really good. I mean, he's really good at speaking.
Yes,
in a way that I think she's gotten better. But
she has definitely gotten better. She's definitely gotten better for sure. But you can just see he's someone who could go everywhere all the time, do all the hard interviews, take all the questions. Yeah. She may be able to do that too. She has just not shown a willingness to do that thus far. Right. I think one question is, you asked the big questions, can you unite after this?
Yeah.
It might be easier, what some would argue, and I think someone Abdul said, for Haley Stevens' supporters to come to Abdul.
Right.
Than the other way, because of how young voters in particular, not just Muslim, but all young voters in Michigan feel about Israel, and getting them to turn out, support a candidate that AIPAC spent $50 to $60 million to support could be a tall order of business. So I think people will, everyone will recognize, there's always a rough period after these primaries. People do tend to come together. That tends to happen particularly in it when the other party has the White House and the Senate and the House. But that is a big question. And both the winner and the loser of this thing are going to have to be very gracious in how they rebuild the coalition it's going to take to win.
Ken Martin had a tough news cycle.
Boy, did it, yes.
chair.
Yeah.
What do you think's happening? I mean, it strikes me there are a couple places. I'm actually going to ask a sort of broader question.
Yeah,
there are a couple of places here where, like Ken Martin, and also in Montana, we have an independent who could win if the Democratic candidate dropped out, or at least the polls show the possibility that he could win. And I just wonder, there are a couple places here where it feels like, were there a really good leader in the party, someone could call that woman and be like, look, you got to drop out, or say to Ken Martin, you're not raising money, you can't do media. Like, what are you doing? Like, I think about Republicans, and if they had something like this, they would be all over that person. So what do you think?
I think there's a couple things happening here. Like, historically, Republicans pre-Trump were very bad at this. This is why they blew the Senate races in 10 and 12 and 22, honestly, even though Trump was around. Trump, he picked all the wrong people, but they had all bad candidates. But there is something happening where the voters do not trust the Democratic Party leadership and are actually sort of negatively polarized by candidates who are supported by the Democratic Party leadership. And there's no one with the credibility. Like, everyone keeps asking, like, how did Ken Martin end up there? And if you're someone who's like us, who's been very involved in politics over the last decade, you're very familiar with Ben Wickler, who the former Wisconsin Party chair, who ran against them. And Ben had the support of Schumer, Jeffries, basically everyone. And that was ended up being
state party chairs. And
that ended up being a negative. Ended up being a negative for him. And you have the same thing here. And it's happening. Like, we are sort of in a Lord of the Flies moment for the party. Like, whatever else you think about Ken Martin, and I supported Ben. I called for Ken to resign after the autopsy. He's doing the best he can, but I think the well has now become so poisoned that you can't look at it and say the best thing for the party is to maintain the status quo.
Right.
We can debate how big a disaster is if we don't, but if you were maximizing your chances of winning now and beyond, someone would go to him and say, now the best thing you can do for the party is to step down. Please step down, and we'll replace someone. It's not an easy process to do that. But then you mentioned Montana. In Michigan, in the 7th District of Michigan, which is Alyssa Slotkin's old seat. We lost it in 2024 when she ran for Senate. It's a very close race. There are 3 candidates in that race. One is Joe Biden's ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. Another is Matt Masden, who carried the nuclear football for Obama, is a veteran.
Right. I've interviewed him.
Yeah, and the third one is a progressive supported by Bernie. I haven't studied enough to know, to really be able to validate these claims, but a lot of people believe that the progressive is the least likely to win that race.
Right.
The two, like, more moderate, credentialed candidates both stayed in the race, and they're going to split the vote. And Lawrence is likely, according to some internal polling that I've read about but not seen, going to win by a lot. And so in a different world, someone would have had the credibility to go to one of these other 2 candidates and say, one of you, if our best chance of winning the seat is one of you is the nominee, one of you's got to get out, flip a coin. Right. And because no one has the credibility in the party right now to do that. And not just with voters, but even with other Democratic politicians. And you're going to see this be a real issue in 2028 when there's no one's going to be able to, like, ride herd over the process.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's so crazy. Yeah. Right. And that we'll see that in 2028. Yeah. Dan Pfeiffer, thank you.
Thanks for having me.